Welcome to Fun and Friends. I'm Avalon.
I'm Sabrina.
And welcome to our channel.
Welcome.
Right now we're reading Throne of Glass.
Yes.
And do you want to give us a recap?
Selena just got summoned to go see the king, and she was panicking for a second there, and she kept thinking about how high they were up, essentially. There was, no ground. She could only see the sky, and it was all glass, so we think she's afraid of heights, firstly. Mm-hmm. And then she went to the room with all the other competitors where she saw who she's competing against for the first time. We found out the rules of the competition, that this championship tournament thing will last for 13 weeks. And even though there's 24 competitors, there'll still be training during the week. And then I think by the end of the week, they have their tournament. And the king emphasized that even though there's 13 weeks, some people will either end up being sent home because they can't complete or finish it, or they will be killed.
Good times.
So great times.
And then we had Caltaine.
And then we ended up meeting Caltaine in the hallway when Dorian was trying to escort Selena back to her chambers because it was lunchtime, so they wanted to go eat. And they had a little sassiness exchange going on about who's prettier, who has a better dress, I think. And Dorian was not pleased at all to have this conversation with her and whatnot, and neither was Charles or Selena. And then they ended up parting ways, and she came back to her chamber. And Charles kept emphasizing how she needs to keep up with her sleep because tomorrow the real work begins for championship.
And probably now this is the next day, is my guess. Yeah. Chapter 11. Selena felt like she had barely closed her eyes when a hand jabbed her side. She groaned, wincing at the drapes were thrown back to welcome the morning sun. Wake up! Not surprisingly, it was Charles. She shimmied beneath the blankets, pulling them over her head, but he grabbed the covers and threw them to the floor. Oh, I'd be pissed.
I'd be pissed, too.
Her nightgown was wrapped around her thighs. Selena shivered. It's cold, she moaned, holding her knees to her body. She didn't care that she only had a few months to beat the other champions. She needed sleep. It would have been nice if the Crown Prince had considered springing her from Andover earlier so she could have some time to regain her strength. How long had he known about the competition anyway? Get up. Charles ripped the pillows from beneath her head. Now, you're wasting my time. If he noticed how much skin was showing, he didn't react. That's why I'd be pissed. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd be cold, but I'd be pissed because, some random guy pulling my sheets off in my nightgown.
It's usually see-through.
Yeah.
Usually. That fabric is usually not
Well,
solid.
it I'm thinking
shows
it's sheer white nightgown,
Yeah, same.
Grumbling, Selena slithered off the edge of the bed, dangling a hand over the edge to touch the floor. Fetch my slippers, she mumbled. The floor's like ice. He growled, but Selena ignored him as she got to her feet. She staggered and slouched into the dining room where an enormous breakfast lay on the table. Charles jerked her chin towards the food. Eat up. The competition starts in an hour. Whatever nerves she felt, she kept them hidden from him as she gave an exasperated sigh and collapsed into the chair with the grace of a large beast. Selena scanned the table. Yet again, there were no knives. She stabbed her fork into a piece of sausage. From the doorway, Charles asked, "Why, might I ask, are you so tired?" She gulped down the rest of the pomegranate juice and wiped her mouth with a napkin.
I think he kind of wanted to know if she had a friend over or not, too.
Yeah.
Which is
why are you so tired? There's all these other men, in this competition. You were the only woman here. I was up till 4 a.m. reading, she said. I sent a letter to your princeling asking for permission to borrow books from the library. He granted my wish and sent 7 books from his personal library, and I am commanded to read. Charles shook his head in disbelief. This isn't your place to write the Crown Prince. She gave him a simpering smile and took a bite of ham. He could have ignored my letter, and besides, I'm his champion. Not everyone feels obligated to be as nasty to me as you are. You're an assassin. If you say I'm a jewel thief, would you treat me with more courtesy? She waved a hand. Don't answer me that. She spooned a porridge into her mouth, found it to be bland, and scooped 4 heaping mounds of brown sugar into the gray mess. Would the competitors actually be worthy opponents? Before she could start worrying, she examined his black clothes. Do you ever wear normal clothing? Hurry up, was all he said. The competition awaited. Suddenly not hungry, she pushed away her bowl of porridge. I should get dressed then. She turned her head to call for Philippa, but paused. Just what sort of activities might I expect at the tournament today, so I can dress accordingly, of course? I don't know, and they don't give us the details until you arrive. The captain rose and drummed the pommel of his sword before calling to a servant as Selena walked into the bedroom. Beside her, Charles spoke to the servant girl. Dress her in pants and a shirt. Nothing loose, nothing frilly or revealing, and bring a cloak. Something loose, nothing frilly or revealing, and bring a cloak. The girl disappeared into the dressing room. Selena followed after her, unceremoniously stripping down to her underclothes and enjoying it far too much when Charles' cheeks reddened before he turned away. A few minutes later, Selena frowned at herself as she hurried after the captain into the foyer. I look ridiculous. These pants are absurd, and this shirt is awful. Stop whining. No one gives a damn about your clothes. He flung open the door to the hall. The guards outside instantly at attention. Besides, you can take them off at the barracks. I'm sure everyone will be thrilled to see your undergarments. She swore violently under her breath, pulling a green velvet cloak tight around herself, and trailed after him. The captain of the guard rushed through the castle, still freezing with the early morning chill, as they soon entered the barracks. Guards in various states of armor saluted them. An open doorway revealed a large mess hall, where many of the guards were just sitting down to breakfast. Finally, Charles stopped somewhere on the ground floor. The giant rectangular room they entered was the size of a grand ballroom. Lined with pillars that supported a mezzanine, the floor was checkered black and white tile, and floor-to-ceiling glass doors that made up one entire wall were open, the gossamer curtains blowing in the chilly breeze that drifted in from the garden. Most of the 23 other champions were already scattered throughout the room, sparring with what could only be their sponsors' trainers. Everyone was carefully monitored by guards. None bothered to look at her, save for that slightly handsome young man with the gray eyes, who gave her a half-smile before returning to firing arrows at a target across the room with unnerving accuracy. She lifted her chin and surveyed the rack of weapons. You expect me to use a mace an hour after sunrise? 6 guards appeared in the doorway behind them, joining the dozens already in the chamber, swords at the ready. If you attempt anything foolish, Charles said quietly, they'll be here. I'm just a jewel thief, remember? She approached the rack, foolish decision to leave all those weapons out. Swords, sword breakers, axes, bows, pikes, hunting daggers, maces, spears, throwing knives, wood staves. While she generally preferred the stealth of a dagger, she was familiar with every weapon here. She glanced around the sparring room and hid a grimace. So were most of the competitors, it seemed. As she inspected them, she caught a movement in the corner of her vision. Kane entered the hall, flanked by 2 guards and a scarred, burly man who must have been his trainer. She squared her shoulders as Kane strode straight towards her, his thick lips parting in a grin. Good morning, he said, his voice raspy and deep. His dark eyes snaked along her body and found her face again. I'd have thought you'd be running home by now. She gave him a close-lipped smile. The fun's just starting, isn't it? Kane returned her smile and stalked off. It would have been so easy to whirl and grab him by the neck and slam his face to the ground. She didn't even realize she was trembling with rage when Charles stepped into the line of vision. Save it for the competition, he said softly, but not weakly. I'm going to kill him, she breathed. No, you're not. If you want to shut him up, then beat him. He's just a brute from the king's army. Don't waste your strength on hating him. She rolled her eyes. Thank you so much for interfering on my behalf. You don't need me to rescue you. It still would have been nice. You can fight your own battles, he pointed with the sword at the weapons rack. Pick one. His eyes shone with a challenge as she untied her cloak and tossed it behind her. Let's see if you can actually back up your swaggering. She'd shut Kane up in an unmarked grave for all of eternity, but now she'd make Charles eat his words. All the weapons were finally made and glistened in the sunlight. Selena estimated her options one by one, seeing each weapon for what sort of damage she might do to the captain's face. Her heart beat rapidly as she ran a finger across the blades and handles of each. She found herself torn between the hunting daggers and a lovely rapier with an ornate bell guard. She could cut his heart from a safe distance with that. The sword whined as she drew it from the stand and held it in her hands. It was a good blade, Strong, smooth, light. They wouldn't let her have a butter knife from the kitchen table, but they gave her access to this? Why not wear him down a bit? Chartle tossed his cape on his Chartle tossed his cape on top of hers, his toned body flexing through the darkness threads of his shirt. He drew his sword. On your guard. He moved into a defensive position, and Selena looked at him dully. Who do you think you are? What sort of person says on your guard? Aren't you going to show me the basics? She said quietly enough for him to hear, her sword dragging from one hand. She rubbed the hilt, her fingers contracting over the cool surface. I was in Andover for a year, you realize. I could have easily forgotten. From the amount of killing that went on in their section of the mines, I highly doubt you forgot a thing. That was with a pickaxe, she said, her smile growing frail. All I had to do was crack a man's head open or hurl the axe into his stomach. Thankfully, none of the other captains paid them any heed. If you consider that sort of gracelessness equal to swordsmanship, that sort of fight, what sort of fighting do you do, Captain Westfall? She put a spare hand over her heart and closed her eyes for emphasis. With a growl, the captain of the guard lunged. But she had been waiting for some time now, and her eyes flew open as soon as his boots scraped against the ground. With a turn of her arm, she brought the sword into blocking position, her legs bracing for the impact as steel struck steel. The noise was strange, somehow more painful than receiving the blow, but Selena thought little of it when he charged again, and she met his weapon parrying with ease. Her arms ached as they were shaken from slumber, as she continued to deflect and parry. Swordplay was like dancing. Certain steps must be followed or else it would fall apart. Once she heard the beat, it all came back. The other competitors faded away into the shadows and sunlight. Good, he said through teeth, blocking her thrust as she forced him into a defensive stance. Her thighs burned. Very good, he breathed. He was pretty good himself. Better than good, actually. Not that she'd tell him that. With a clang, the two swords met, and they pressed into each other's blades. He was stronger, and she grunted with the force required to hold her sword against his. But strong as he may be, he was not as quick. She withdrew and fainted, her feet jabbing and flexing on the floor with bird-like grace. Caught off guard, he only had time to deflect his parry, lost in his size. She surged forward, arm coming down again, twisting and turning, loving the smooth ache within her shoulder as the blade slammed against his. She was moving fast like a dancer in the temple ritual, fast like a snake in the red desert, fast like the water down the side of a mountain. He kept up, and she allowed him to advance before reclaiming the position. He tried to catch her unawares with a blow to the face, but her anger awoke as her elbow snapped up and deflected, slamming into his fist and forcing it down. Something to remember when fighting me, Sardothian, he panted, the sunlight caught in his golden brown eyes. She grunted, lunging to deflect his newest attack. I don't lose. He grinned at her, and before she could comprehend the word, something cut into her feet, and she had a sickening feeling of falling. She gasped as her spine collided with the marble and the rapier flying from her hand. Chartle pointed his blade at her heart. I win, he breathed. She pushed herself onto her elbows. You had to resort to tripping me? That's hardly winning at all. I'm not the one with the sword at my heart. A sound of clashing weapons and labored breathing filled the air. She flicked her eyes to the other champions, who were all in the middle of sparring. All, of course, except Cain. He grinned broadly at her, and Selena bared her teeth. You have the skills, Chartle said, but some of the moves are still undisciplined. She broke her stare with Cain and glared up at Chartle's face. But that's never stopped me from killing before, she spat. Chartle chuckled at her agitation and pointed the sword at the rack, allowing her to get to her feet. Pick another, something different. Make it interesting, too. Something that will make me sweat, please. Something that will make me sweat? You'll be sweating when I skin you alive and squish your eyeballs beneath my feet, she muttered, picking up the rapier. That's the spirit. She practically threw the rapier into place and drew the hunting knives without hesitation. My dear old friends. A wicked smile spread across her face. Chapter 12. Just as Selena was about to launch herself and the knives at the captain, someone stomped a spear into the ground and called the room to attention. She faced the voice and found a rocky, balding man standing beneath the mezzanine. Your attention now, the man repeated. Selena looked at Chartle, who nodded, taking the knives from her as they journeyed 23 the 23 other competitors encircling the man. I'm Theodus Borello, weapons master and judge of this competition. Of course, the king's the final judge of you sorry lot, but I'll be the one determining every day if you're fit to be his champion. He patted his sword hilt, and Selena had to admire the beautiful woven gold of his pommel. I've been weapons master here for 30 years. I've lived in this castle for 25 more than that. I've trained many a lord and knight and would be champion Ardalan. It will be very hard to impress me. Beside Selena, Chartle stood with his shoulders thrown back. It occurred to her that Borello might have trained the captain, given how easily Chartle had kept up with her. If Borello had trained him, then the weapons master must live up to his title. She knew better than anyone not to underestimate opponents based on their size. The king's already told you all there is to know about this competition, Borello said, holding his hands behind his back, but I figured you lot are itching to know more about each other. He pointed a stubby finger at Kane. You, your name, occupation, and where do you hail from, and be honest about it. I know one of you are bakers and candlestick makers. Kane's insufferable grin returned. Kane, a soldier in King's army, I hail from White Fang Mountains. Of course he did. She heard the tales of brutality in the mountain folk from that region and seen a few of them up close, seen the fierceness in their eyes. Many of them rebelled against Adarlan and would end up dead. What would his fellow mountain dwellers say if they could see him now? She gritted her teeth. What would the people of Tesseran say if they could see her now? Borello, however, either didn't know or didn't care, and didn't even give a nod before he pointed to the man to the Kane's right. Selena immediately liked him. And you? A slender, tall man with thinning blonde hair surveyed the circle and sneered. Xavier Ferrol, master thief of Bizendale. Master thief? That man? Of course. She realized his reed thinness probably aided in slipping into houses. Maybe it wasn't a bluff. One by one, the 21 other competitors introduced themselves. There were 6 more seasoned soldiers, all of them thrown out of the army for questionable behavior, which must have been truly questionable given the Adarlan's army was notorious for ruthlessness. Then there were 3 other thieves, including a dark-haired, gray-eyed Knox Owen, whom she'd actually heard of in passing, and who'd been giving her charming smiles all morning. That's, I think, the guy that we were talking about.
Yep.
The 3 mercenaries looked about ready to boil someone alive, and then there were 2 shackled murderers. As his name suggested, Bill Chastain, the Eye-Eater, ate the eyes of his victims. That is disgusting. That is disgusting.
That's just vile.
I'm wondering, did he cook them first, or did he just go...
He probably just...
That's what I was thinking.
Just scoop and go.
Do you take a spoon and just, like, spoon them out?
I'm sure he did. Or he just used his fingers. I don't
Wait, then they will pop. I feel like they would pop if you used your finger.
They won't. They'll squish, but they won't pop. Anyways, let's just go on. I don't like that. Eyeballs stop and pus trip me, and toenails trip me out. I can't.
You're like basically a nurse too.
I am, but nurses still have their issues with the human body.
He looked surprisingly plain with mousy brown hair, tan skin, and average height. When Selena had trouble not staring at his scar-flecked mouth, the other murderer was Ned Clement, who'd gone for 3 years under the name Scythe, and for the weapon that he'd used to torture and hack apart temple priestesses. Oh, wonderful. It was a wonder they hadn't executed either man, though from their tan skin she guessed they'd spent years since their captures toiling under the sun in Calakula, the southern sistered labor camp to Andover. Next came 2 scarred, silent men who seemed to be the cronies of some far-off warlord, and then 5 assassins. She immediately forgot the names of the first 4, a gangly, haughty boy, a hulking brute, a disdainful runt of a man, and a sniving, hawk-nosed prat who claimed that he had an affinity for knives. They weren't even in the Assassin's Guild. Not that Arobun Hamel would ever allow them. Membership required years of training and more than impressive track record. These four might be skilled. They lacked the refinement that Arobun favored in his followers. She'd have to keep an eye on them, but at least they weren't silent assassins from the windswept dunes of the Red Desert. Those would be worthy of her. They would make her sweat a bit. She'd spent a month training with them, one burning summer, and her muscles still ached from the memory of the grueling exercises. The last assassin called himself Grave made her pause. He was slight and short and kind of wicked face, with the kind of wicked face that made people quickly look away. He'd entered the room wearing shackles and only had one removed when the guards, all 5 of them, gave him a stern warning. Even now they stood nearby watching him relentlessly as he introduced himself. Graves flashed an oily smile, revealing his brown teeth. Gross. Her disgust didn't improve when Grave ran an eye over her body. An assassin like that never stopped at just killing, not if his victim was female. She willed herself to hold his hungry gaze. And you? Barella said, cutting into her thoughts. Lillian Gordinia, she said, holding her chin high. Jewel thief from Belhaven. Some men snickered, and she clenched her teeth. They'd stop their laughing if they knew her true name, if they knew that this jewel thief could skin them alive with a knife. Fine, Barella said, waving a hand. You all have 5 minutes to put away your weapons and catch your breath. Then we're on to mandatory run to see how fit you are. Those of you who can't run the distance, go home, or back to whatever prison or sponsors found you rotting in first. Your first test is in 5 days. Consider us merciful, if not sooner. With that, everyone scattered, the champions murmuring to their trainers about whatever competitor they deemed the biggest threat. Cain or Grave, most likely. Certainly not a jewel thief from Belhaven. Chartle remained beside her, watching the champion stride off. She still hadn't spent 8 years building a reputation and a year laboring in Dover to be disregarded like this. If I have to call myself jewel thief again, Chartle raised his brows. You'll do what exactly? Do you know how insulting it is to pretend to be some nobody from a small town in Fenharrow? He stared her down, quiet for a moment. Are you that arrogant? She bristled, but he went on. It was foolish to spar with you just now. I'll admit that I recognized you'd be good. Thankfully, no one noticed. And do you want to know why, Lillian? He took a step closer, his voice lowering. Because you're some pretty little girl, because you're a nobody jewel thief from a small town in Fenharrow. Look around. He half turned to the other champions. Is anyone staring at you? Are any of them sizing you up? No, because you're not real competition. Because you don't stand between them and whatever freedom or wealth they're looking for. Exactly, it's insulting. It's smart, is what that is. And you're going to keep a low profile throughout the entire competition. You're not going to excel, and you're not going to trounce these thieves and soldiers and unknown assassins. You're going to stay solidly in the middle. And no one will look your way because you're not a threat. Because they'll think that you'll be eliminated sooner or later, and they'll focus their attention on getting rid of the bigger, stronger, faster champions like Cain. But you're going to outlast them, Chartle continued. And when they wake up on the morning of the final duel and find that you are their opponent and that you have beaten them, the look on their faces will make all of the insults and lack of attention worthwhile. He extended his hand to lead her outside. So, what do you have to say about that,
I like that.
Lillian Gordiana?
I take that.
Yeah.
I would take that.
Yep.
Swallow your ego.
He did her a solid by making up that pretense.
Him and Dorian really set her up for success
with that. And she needs to swallow her pride and see past that.
She does. Because they will eventually know her true identity at the end of it. So
yeah.
Get over it.
I can look out for myself, she said lightly, taking his hand. But I have to say, you're rather brilliant, Captain. So brilliant, actually, that I might give you one of the jewels I plan to steal from the Queen tonight. Chartle chuckled and strode outside where the running contest awaited. Her lungs burned, her legs were leaden, but she kept running, kept her position in the middle of the pack of champions. Barella, Chartle, and the other trainers, along with 36 armed guards, followed them around the game park and the horse track. Some of the champions, Grave, Ned, and Bill included, had been given long manacles. She supposed it was a privilege that Chartle hadn't looked her up to. But to her surprise, Kane led the pack and was nearly 10 yards in front of the rest of them. How could he possibly be that fast? The sound of crunching leaves and labored breathing filled the warm autumn air, and Selena kept her gaze on the ramp and gleaming dark hair of the thief in front of her. One step after another, one breath in, one breath out. Breathe, she said to remember to keep breathing. Ahead, Kane turned the corner, heading north, back towards the castle. Like a flock of birds, they followed him. One step after another, never slowing down. Let them all watch Kane, let them all plot against him, and didn't need to win the race to prove she was better. She was better without any kind of validation that the king could give her. She missed a breath and her knees wobbled, but she kept upright. The run would be over soon. She hadn't even dared to look behind her to see if any of the had fallen. She could feel Chartle's eyes on her, though, reminding her to keep in the middle. At least he had that much faith in her. Trees parted, revealing the field that lay between the game park and the stables. The end of the path. Her head spun, and she would have cursed at the stitch that lanced through her side had she had any breath to do so. She had to stay in the middle. Kane cleared the trees and raised her arms above her head in victory. He ran a few more feet, slowing his pace to cool down, and his trainer cheered for him. Selena's only response was to keep her feet moving. Only a few yards left. The light in the open field grew brighter and brighter as she approached. Stars flashed in her eyes, swarming in her vision. She had to stay in the middle. Years of training in Arabon Hamel had taught her the dangers of giving up too easily. Then she was through the trees, and the open field surrounded her in an explosion of space and grass and blue sky. The men in front of her slowed to a stop. It was all she could do to keep from sinking to her knees, but she made her legs slow, made her feet walk, made herself take a breath after breath as the stars continued bursting from her eyes. Good, Borello said, reining in his horse, surveying whoever had first returned. Get water. We've got more training after this. Through the spots in her vision, she saw Chartle stop his horse. Her feet moved of her own accord towards him, then passed back to the woods. Where are you going? I dropped my ring back there, she lied, doing her best to look scatterbrained. Just give me a moment to find it. Without waiting for her approval, she entered the trees to the sneers and snickers of champions who had overheard. From the approaching crashing noises, she knew another champion was on his way out. She stepped into the cover of bushes, stumbling as the world became dark and light and tilted. She had barely sunk to her knees when she vomited. She heaved and heaved until she had nothing left inside. The straggling champion passed by. On the trembling limbs, she grappled onto the nearest tree and hauled herself upright. She found Captain Westfall standing across the path, watched her with pursed lips. She wiped her mouth on the back of her wrist and said nothing as she exited the woods.
Dang.
Intense training session.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so I think that the competition's going to be harder than what
she
originally thought, especially because even the big bulky guy, Kane, is doing really well in even like the endurance stuff, like the running.
Yeah. I know.
Well, I mean, she's got to win in the end, right? Like
she has to.
I mean,
it's her story.
It's her story. So she's
gonna win.
She's gonna win, but
the journey getting there.
Yeah.
I'm ready to see more. I'm just ready for more.
I'm ready for more. So.
Like, okay, good, we got it. Okay, good, great.
We're starting the competition. We're actually starting to get into like the meat of the book instead of like sassy courtier talk and flirty glances, but we're actually like getting into the meat of this story. So I'm ready for more. I'm excited. I want to see where this goes.
I'm patiently waiting.
I want to see some assassin stuff.
I want to know who's going to be first killed off, like, or sent home first, like, the first to be gone from the competition.
I'm assuming it's going to be one of, like, the lower ones. Or it's going to be a really close call for her, and it's going to be, like, a wake-up call for her to do better on the next one.
Yeah, I mean, we did say this in the last couple of videos, that she is kind of cocky and arrogant about her own skills. And that might be blinding for her.
Yeah, so I think I'm wondering if the first competition where they actually have to kill people off, if it's going to be like a close call, and that's going to be a wake-up call, like, okay, maybe I'm not the best, and
I need to train better.
Yeah, I need
to sleep.
Yeah, and I need to listen to what Chartle says to me, because he's got skills.
I think he does have some inside scoop. He's just saying that he doesn't, but I think he does.
Yeah.
And he's, like, guiding her, and that's why he's kind of being like, just do it type of attitude towards her, because he knows, I think he knows some things that the others don't know.
Yeah, well, especially because he's, like, the prince's right-hand man.
Best believe the prince probably selling Charles some stuff,
anything that he knows.
Yeah, because he wants her to win, so. I'm just excited. That's all I have to say at the end of this. But yeah, let us know what you guys think. We want to hear it in the comments below. And we look forward to seeing you guys next time. You guys have a really good weekend, okay?
Bye.
Bye.